Hi everyone, my name is Olivia DeLong. I am the Senior Health Editor at BabyCenter.com. I'm very excited. I have Dr. Jaime Shamonki with me today from CBR, otherwise known as Cord Blood Registry. We're going to be talking about preserving newborn stem cells. Dr. Shamonki, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at CBR?
Sure, it's so nice to meet you, Olivia. So I'm Dr. Jaime Shamonki. I am the Chief Medical Officer of CBR, which is the largest newborn stem cell preservation company in the world. I'm a pathologist by training, and I have expertise in women's health and in blood banking. And I'm also a mom of kids who are very big now. They're ages 20 and 17. So I can tell you it goes by very quickly.
I have a 2.5-year-old, so we've got a long way to go to that. So let's start with the basics. We asked our Baby Center community about the questions they had about cord blood banking. And of course, a lot of them were about cord blood banking, but you all focus on preservation of newborn stem cells. Can you tell us a little bit about the difference and how that works together?
Absolutely. I know the language can be very confusing. So actually, newborn stem cell preservation includes cord blood banking. It's just a more comprehensive term because we're talking about banking not just the cord blood, which is the residual blood that comes from the placenta after the baby's born, but also really unique stem cells that are different from those in the cord blood that are present in the cord tissue. And that's just the squishy umbilical cord itself. So we're able to preserve both types of amazing, powerful stem cells after babies are born. And what's interesting to know is that we have stem cells even in our adult bodies, but they're different than the stem cells that are in babies. So the baby's newborn stem cells have some pretty unique qualities that make them very powerful for a lot of clinical treatments. We can use cord blood for transplant, so traditional bone marrow transplant. We can also use cord blood in the treatment of many exciting emerging regenerative medicine clinical indications. And cord tissue, which has its own type of stem cell in it, is being studied in hundreds of clinical trials, also in many regenerative medicine clinical indications.
That's wonderful. That's awesome. Can you explain why a parent would decide to go through the process of newborn stem cell preservation?
There's actually two areas of science that are dependent on newborn stem cells for helping families. One of these areas was discovered, believe it or not, over 30 years ago, and that's where the stem cells are used for a bone marrow transplant. So the FDA has actually approved the use of cord blood for bone marrow transplant in the treatment of over 80 conditions. Now, fortunately, these conditions are very rare, so it's not very likely that your child will need to use a cord blood unit for transplant. But if they do, it's actually an amazing resource. Interestingly, most frequently, cord blood donations happen between siblings. And that's because siblings have a 75% chance of being an immunologic match, or at least a partial match. We recently shared a story about this family who had saved cord blood for their firstborn child. And when his baby brother was born, he was born with a rare genetic disorder called SCID. A lot of us know that as bubble boy disease. And his baby brother was a match to the older brother. And so they were actually able to transplant the younger son using his older brother's stem cells, which was pretty incredible because, of course, it's an example of how families don't know how they're going to use these stem cells at the time that they preserve them, but it was a pretty incredible story. The second way that stem cells are being used is technically innumerable ways because it all falls under the category of regenerative medicine. And regenerative medicine is this emerging area of medicine, lots of different techniques, and many of them are in clinical trials looking at stem cells derived from either the cord blood or cord tissue, these newborn stem cells. Most regenerative medicine clinical trials are actually using a child's own stem cells to treat a condition like cerebral palsy. This is really interesting because there seems to be a population of cells that's very unique to umbilical cord derived stem cells. Where they're actually able to talk to the immune system, they're able to stimulate the body to repair damage, tissue damage, stimulate wound healing, and even repair nerve damage. So there's actually currently hundreds of clinical trials right now in areas like autoimmune disease, neurological damage, even lung damage from COVID, believe it or not, that are using cord blood and cord tissue derived stem cells for regenerative medicine uses. So the future is very exciting. Another really interesting thing to me is that a lot of the areas that are being investigated in this regenerative medicine area actually tend to be conditions that affect us more as we age. So I think the likelihood that a family will use their stem cells well into the future is only becoming more likely.
That's wonderful. And I love that you shared that story of the family. That's great. As a parent, I have my own 2.5-year-old daughter. It can be very overwhelming to know where to go for health information. Can you talk a little bit about where parents should go to find out more information about this process?
Absolutely. I agree. There is an overwhelming amount of information out there. So I think a great place to start in researching newborn stem cell preservation is the CBR website. It's full of all kinds of information. You can imagine we've been collecting questions from parents for many, many years, over 30 years to be exact. And so that's a great place to start. There's also often educational materials that will be present in your midwife or your OBGYN's office, so you can ask for some of those materials or even ask your healthcare provider what they think about it. Additionally, there's a great non-commercial website out there. It's called Parents Guide to Cord Blood, and it too is full of really great information that can help answer your questions. Finally, I would say call CBR. We have a team of newborn stem cell educators, and we have a team of clinical specialists that are on staff specifically to answer parents' questions. So you can call anytime and ask away. They would be happy to answer your questions.
Super helpful. Again, it's really confusing out there, so thank you for letting us know about that.
Of course.
Can you walk us through the actual process of collecting newborn stem cells? Does the baby feel anything? Do they feel any pain?
Happy to address that question. A lot of people are confused about what exactly happens. So the process of collecting newborn stem cells is very simple. It's safe and it's totally painless for both baby and the person giving birth. Once a family decides to enroll in newborn stem cell preservation with CBR, we'll ship the family a kit. That kit has everything that your healthcare provider needs in it to collect those newborn stem cells and get them back to our facility for long-term preservation. The hardest thing for you will be to remember to bring that kit with you to the hospital or wherever you're giving birth. From that point, it's actually quite simple. You just want to make sure that the person who will be facilitating your birth knows that you're collecting newborn stem cells. You want to make sure you've given them the kit. The actual process of collecting newborn stem cells is very straightforward. So after the baby is born, you clamp the umbilical cord and then you cut the umbilical cord, and that separates the baby from the placenta and the umbilical cord. And the first thing that will happen is we collect cord blood. So the cord blood actually comes from the umbilical cord, and you're able to drain some of that residual blood that's in the placenta. So that's the baby's umbilical cord blood. And that whole process takes just a few minutes. Actually, most of the time, parents don't even remember that this happened. They're sort of, counting fingers and toes and taking pictures, and the next thing you know, this process is done. And as I mentioned, very simple, totally painless. If you're collecting cord tissue, what we do is you actually cut a piece of the umbilical cord itself, put that in a little cord tissue collection cup, and then that goes in the kit along with the cord blood. The only other thing you have to remember to do, which is sometimes hard in all the fun and chaos of giving birth, is to call the medical courier. The phone number is inside the kit. We make it very easy for you to follow those instructions. But you want to call that courier within an hour or two to make sure that a medical courier will come meet you at the hospital, pick up that kit, and whisk it away to our facility in Tucson, Arizona, where once we receive those newborn stem cells, we will process them and get them ready for storage, and they'll be moved into long-term cryogenic storage tanks.
Great, that was so helpful to know. It sounds like a very simple process.
It is.
Can you explain the difference between cord blood banking and delayed cord clamping?
Absolutely. I know this is very confusing, and we get this question all the time. So first of all, the good news is you can do both delayed cord clamping and cord blood banking. So you don't have to choose between one or the other. So I'll explain what delayed cord clamping is. What this refers to is after the baby's born, remember we clamp the umbilical cord and then cut the umbilical cord, and that's what separates the baby from the umbilical cord and the placenta. If you delay the period of time between delivery and clamping that umbilical cord. That's called delayed cord clamping. And the reason why you might do that is because after the baby's born, some of that blood that remains in the placenta can actually flow back to the baby. And it's believed that in some babies, especially premature ones, there might be a benefit to their long-term health outcome if they have a little bit of time after they're born to receive that transfusion, we call it, or just extra blood flow back into their little bodies. It's important to keep in mind that the longer you delay that cord clamping, the less blood will be in the placenta for you to collect and cord blood bank. So the best thing to do is just speak to your OBGYN or midwife before your baby's born and come up with a plan. Most OBGYNs are recommending a 30 to 60 second delay. What's nice about this is that that delay is still showing some benefits to especially those premature infants, but it also leaves enough blood in the placenta that you can get a pretty healthy and robust umbilical cord blood unit if that's your choice to preserve cord blood. And the other thing to keep in mind is that for families who have a longer delay and don't have much cord blood left, that's okay, because remember, you can still bank cord tissue, which is another source of amazing newborn stem cells.
Great, thank you so much for that explanation. Another question from our baby center community was, what's the difference between public and private cord blood banks?
That's a really great question, and this is something that parents need to understand and think about before they deliver. Public cord blood banks are actually collecting donated cord blood units. These samples are then listed on a public registry. And the idea is that you would donate your cord blood unit. It would be anonymously available to a stranger if that person was in need of a stem cell transplant. This is, of course, provided they're an immunologic match to the cord blood unit. So if you are interested in donating your cord blood, there's a few things you need to know. One is that you can only donate if your hospital has a partnership with a public cord blood bank. There need to be people in the hospital that work for that public bank that are there to collect the cord blood. The other is that even though there's no cost associated with this donation, once you donate it, you won't have access to that unit anymore. It becomes listed on this public registry, and it's an altruistic thing to do, but it's no longer available to your baby or to your family. And that's the major point of distinction between a public bank and a private bank like CBR. Now, the service that CBR provides is called family banking or private cord blood banking. And the idea here is that the samples are saved for exclusive use by the baby who donated the cord blood or for a relative, somebody in your family. And these would only be used either for an approved stem cell treatment, such as a transplant, or for a clinical trial that's an approved clinical trial. Now, CBR would never list this cord blood on a public registry. It's very different than the public bank model. This cord blood would only be available to your family or to your relatives. Now, families pay a one-time fee for processing to get that cord blood unit in the bank. And then there's an annual storage fee that a family would pay for as long as they want to bank those newborn stem cells.
Is it okay to bank for just one child, or should you bank for all of your children?
Well, if you can, I always recommend that people bank for all of their children, because there's times that it's best to use your own stem cells for treatment, and other times it's best to use a closely related donor. So in the bone marrow transplant setting, typically you want to use a closely related donor for a better immune cell match. We most frequently see transplants occurring between siblings. However, regenerative medicine clinical trials are very frequently using a child's own stem cells for treatment. So if you look at clinical trials in the area of cerebral palsy, most of the first children who were treated were using their own stem cells. So this way, if you've banked stem cells from all of your children, you've optimized the clinical scenarios where they may be able to participate in both approved treatments as well as some of these emerging regenerative medicine clinical trials.
Great, that makes so much sense. Thank you for clarifying that. Are there any scenarios where parents would not be able to preserve their newborn stem cells?
Well, in rare circumstances, there may be an emergency situation that occurs around the delivery that could take precedence over, say, turning your attention to banking cord blood or cord tissue. In those cases, if an OBGYN or a midwife is tending to the birthing person or the baby, they would make the decision that perhaps they couldn't stop and bank newborn stem cells. These are very rare, but these emergency situations do occur. The other thing to know about is that when we receive the cord blood and cord tissue at our laboratory, we run various quality markers on those tissue samples. So this includes, we'll look at cell counts. We want to know how big is the stem cell unit. We'll look for bacterial contamination, viability, in other words, how many cells are still alive, and then even infectious disease marker testing. So the results of these tests would never prevent us from storing on a family's behalf. However, sometimes if the result is less than ideal, we'll have a conversation with the family and we'll advise them that perhaps this unit may not be as clinically useful given the result of some of these markers. But in that case, this would be a conversation that you could have with your physician. Certainly CBR is happy to help with that decision making as well.
That's great. So parents can talk to CBR and make that decision based on what they feel comfortable with and what you all recommend.
Exactly.
So I know there's some costs associated with preserving newborn stem cells. Can you tell us what those costs cover?
So the way to think about how the fees work is there's a first-year fee that really comprises all of those costs, as I said, of getting the unit from the bedside into the CBR tanks. And so that's the cost of the kit we send to your home, the collection of that unit, the shipping of that unit, the medical courier service that will get it to the Arizona facility, the processing of that unit because it goes from being cord blood or cord tissue into a little bag of stem cells, and then ultimately putting it into that cryogenic tank. In addition, for every year that you decide to store those newborn stem cells, there's a storage fee that will apply, and this will happen every year around your child's birthday. And I always tell parents to go to the CBR website. It's the most up-to-date, transparent information on pricing. And it also has some information on a referral program and gift registry, which is also great. It can help make cord blood and cord tissue all that much more affordable. And it's good to know that you actually don't pay anything until after the stem cell units are received in our laboratory and processed and into the tank.
Great. It's great to know that parents have lots of different options when it comes to ways to pay. Is there anything you want to share with the Baby Center audience that we didn't cover today?
Sure. Well, there's a lot of things I think about. I talk to a lot of parents, and sometimes people come to me and they say, I'm on the fence. I really haven't been able to decide, is this the right choice for my family? And what those conversations make me think about are the CBR families who've actually used their newborn stem cells. The majority of the time when people bank, they have no idea if they're going to need their newborn stem cells and how they would use them. But for the families who have experienced life-saving or major life-improving treatments, those families look back with a 100% degree certainty that they needed this. And so I always think about those families making that decision and being so grateful. And so I like to remind people that this is a decision that you can't change your mind afterwards, right? There's one opportunity to bank newborn stem cells, and that's at the time that your baby is born. The other thing I like to tell people is that over 85% of the units that go out from the CBR tanks into the clinical setting are actually used for regenerative medicine purposes. So while the historic probability that somebody would need a cord blood unit for a transplant was pretty low due to the rare incidence of childhood cancers and genetic disorders, thankfully, the calculation is changing. So the likelihood that your child or a family member will be able to benefit from all of these exciting emerging regenerative medicine treatments, the likelihood is increasing every day. CBR and others in the industry are spending a lot of time and effort on increasing those clinical use cases. And so I feel a lot of confidence that our families will have all the more benefit from the newborn stem cells that they've stored.
Great. It really is remarkable what you guys are doing. Thanks again so much, Dr. Shamonki, for being here, for CBR, for explaining to our baby center parents and community about preserving newborn stem cells. I really enjoyed this conversation.
It was a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.